So we're back in the saddle in 2018, hey, after Christmas and New Year. And if you thought 2017 saw a lot of change, I reckon fasten your seatbelts and see what's going to happen this year. Amazing things happening in disruption in all sorts of sectors. And here's a model I think might help us have a little bit of a think about what we can try or what to look for as our markets shift virtually beneath our feet. In the 80s and the 90s, the distribution model for computers was via computer stores. So IBM and the likes sold their computers to distributors in computer stores, and you'd go in there and the salesperson would talk to you and you'd choose a computer and you'd take it home with you. So they were selling, IBM was selling their computers via other people's assets, their stores, computer stores, and using their labour. But this dude called Dell, Michael Dell, came along and said, hey, I'm just going to sell them direct to the public. So this cutting out the middleman is not a new strategy, but gee, it was a powerful one. In '83, he did $6 million in his first year. 3 years later, he was up to $34 million in sales. 2 years later, it was $159 million. 3 years later, $800 million. And before he'd done 10 years, he was a $2 billion company. I can't even wrap my head around what he would have had to do to achieve that rate of growth. But clearly this model, which delivered cheaper computers, worked exceptionally well. It also gave him insights into what customers wanted. He could listen to them, talk to them directly, and there's many other things that he did well. But this was a big thing, going direct, using his own labour and his own properties to deliver direct to customers. So cutting out the middleman, is that what we should do every time? Well, how about taxis? Taxis use their own cars and their own drivers, own assets, own labour, up until recently when we all know what happened. This little company called Uber came along and they said, well, we're going to use other people's cars, your cars, we're going to use you to drive them around yourselves. So we went back the other way. Supermarkets are in place to sell food companies' products. So a food company, what are they doing? They're using other people's assets. So if I'm Mars or Unilever, I'm going to use a supermarket to sell. I'm not going to use my own sales force and I'm not going to use my own stores. So food companies are here. And they sell through Coles and Woolies. What do Coles and Woolies do? Well, Coles and Woolies are here. What happens when we go to the supermarket? They're using our labour, aren't they? They're not providing labour. We're picking the stuff off the shelf. We're putting it in to the trolley. We're driving it home. We're unpacking it. So they're using their own stores, but they're using our labour. But then what's happening now? This is visiting a store. But what about supermarket for online? One reason why supermarkets might not want us to go online and shop is because all of a sudden they've got to start using their own labour. We enter it on the computer, they've got to go to the shelf, they've got to put it in a box, they've got to drive it to our place. So they're providing their own labour in this model and their own delivery force, their own vehicles. So there's more expense here for them. Now, what's also happening now is food companies are going, well, what if we do a Dell and we just sell straight to the consumer? So there's also an announcement recently in the UK that the likes of Mars and Unilever are going to sell directly to consumers. So they're going to skip these guys. If it's online, well, they can do it themselves, right? And presumably they'll do it for a third cheaper. So this stuff's moving around. Who might be up in the top left-hand corner? Up here we've got real estate agents. They have a bit of a footprint, but essentially they're normally in your home to sell it. So they're using our asset, the home, and they're providing the labour to sell it. But of course, what's happening now with a number of startups in the real estate industry is there's all this DIY, do-it-yourself, selling your own house. So there's a number of startups that are gaining a fair bit of traction by moving down here, where we're using our labour, selling our own home. There's some really cool things actually being done at the moment by Australia Post. One of the things they're doing is they're saying, well, if stuff's moving online, if we're coming down here, then one of the challenges for a retailer is getting the stuff out to people. So one of the things that Australia Post has launched is a startup called Shipster. And we go there, we register our email address, and we can buy from 50 retailers, and the retailers themselves can use Australia Post assets and Australia Post labour to get it to you, as opposed to having to do this online supermarket thing down here. So that's a pretty cool startup. There's another startup linked to Australia Post called Fulfillio. So if I'm a small and medium enterprise and I've been successful and I'm growing and I'm spending heaps of my time, Michael Dell would have had this problem, I'm spending heaps of my time packing my own goods and shipping them out, going up to the post office, getting them out or getting them picked up by a courier. I'm spending a lot of time getting my stuff, if it's a product, packaged up and shipped and distributed. But now SMEs have this option, again with a startup linked to Australia Post, is a company called Fulfillio, where you can essentially outsource that part of it to them. So now an SME is using other people's assets and other people's labour to distribute their own products instead of doing all that work themselves. So we've got startups all over the place here. And the key to this for you is, what does your business do? Whose assets does it use to distribute your product? Whose labour do you use? And if you flip across one of the quadrants, let's just try, you're in one, pick one of the other three, or maybe you're in a few, but you might need to put one other of them on steroids. There is opportunity everywhere in 2018 to find new revenue and new ways to grow. Good luck this year, guys.